as a country, we've never won any battle against unsustainable mining or Galamsey, as we normally call it. I think that we've most of the times used knee-jerk approach, most of the times used a military approach in resolving the issue of illegal mining or sustainable mining. I think that has never helped us. If you look at the history of most of the initiatives or interventions within that space, they've never helped us because the critical contributors of Galamsey we've not actually addressed or looked at them. One is the law. We think that the reason why Galamsey is still a challenge in Ghana is because of the Mineral and Mining Act 703 of 2006. It is a major problem because one, it gives most of the royalties and revenues that come from mining to the central government and not the people who own the land. Yes, the law says that the mineral rights belong to the government, but the land belongs to the people and are being shared owners of the land and mineral rights of the state must also benefit somewhat from it. But if you look at the law carefully, it looks as if all the royalties, all the necessary revenue that will help improve the living conditions of these areas have been allocated to the central government and depriving them of a major local development. And that could be a factor to drive people not wanting to allocate their land to concessional mines or maybe legal process of mining, but rather giving it to people within communities to mine. Aside allocating royalties to central government also has to do with what I call a cheap ground rent that goes against the local people. For example, as a community, if you give your land to a farmer to tilt that land or use that land for farming, within our setup, we have something called Abunu or Abusan, or sometimes we even charge as high as or as low as 200 Ghana cedis for a year. But if you look at our mineral law, a ground rent paid to a landowner or a stool land is only 15 Ghana cedis, right? So when the amount is too small for the mineral owner, what the landowner will do is to get illegal miners who will pay more than what the government will allocate to them through the legal process of acquiring land. So I think the cheap nature of our ground rent to the stool lands and landowners is also a contributory factor of this activity. And lastly, I think that the law has not prepared the teeming youth within some of these mining areas for jobs in terms of skill development and also certain skill acquisition and also quota in terms of employment for the mining sector. So if I live in my community and realizes that most of the employees of mining firms are not within the community, but rather taken from other communities, and we do not benefit in terms of employment, looking at the wage disparity between the work we do and the mining sector, I also be forced into the mining sector or illegal mining. So the law has to be looked at. Now, beyond the law also has to do with culture. These days, there's an issue of income disparity and income inequality, where few people are taking advantage of the resources we have, especially politicians, taking advantages of the resources we have and use these resources at their own disposal or at their own advantage. Now, when you do that, and I am within the community and realizes that I'm not benefiting from the resources of the national or what we call the national cake, I'll be forced to go into illegal mining to also improve my status within the community or improve my status within the nation, because I also need that income so that when you come from the cities to the community, at least I'll be able to relate with you well in terms of status. So culturally, status is also a major player when it comes to a contributing factor to this whole illegal mining thing. Now, lastly, I think I've touched on unemployment. Lastly, also has to do with greed. I think these days, the quest for materialism, the quest for huge consumption, the quest for unregulated expenditure is also a cause for illegal mining. Because people just want to expend, right? And they don't want to go through the normal practices of working to get these revenues for expenditure. They want it quick way. And they are copying mostly from the politicians they sat in class with who are getting it easier. So if politicians are getting it easier, pastors are making it easier, then it also enforces them within the inequality framework to also engage in other environmental terrorism or environmental crime activities to also make it easier. And for them, logging trees or felling trees will not give them the money they need. For them, sun winning will not give them the money they need, that huge money they need. But they know gold will give them the money. So they'll go into the production of gold through illegal and unsustainable means. So our income inequality and the quest for unregulated expenditure within our system is also a major factor when it comes to Galamsey. Yes, there may be other reasons of poor regulation, poor standardization of the space. All these are because the various stakeholders within the sector are not benefiting somewhat, and for that matter, will ensure that the right procedures are not adhered or complied with within the stakeholder framework. I don't think that we should declare state of emergency within the mining environment or to address the issue of unsustainable mining or illegal mining. As I indicated earlier, we applied a lot of force in that space, but we will not be able to resolve the issue. It means that force has never been the solution to addressing this particular menace or canker. I also believe that we cannot use an illegal approach because mostly when we talk of state of emergency, it is an intervention that goes beyond the legal framework of applying certain laws. Sometimes you squash the law, you put the law aside to implement certain policies or to address certain challenges you think that are bedeviling us as a country. And I'm not a fan of putting law aside to resolve a problem because that has never resolved it. Because if you put the law aside, it may lead to a huge problem that you may not be able to address in future. For example, artisanal mining or these issues of Galamsey has employment levels between 500,000 to almost 4 million people. Now, when you introduce such intervention, which is an emergency or state of emergency intervention, it means that you need to deploy your military, you need to deploy your security services. As to how much your or how many your security services will be able to man these 500,000 employees within that space is something that maybe you need to critically look at. Beyond that, you need to also mobilize certain logistics as to whether as a country we do have those logistics to man these 500,000. I don't think we do. We have to critically look at that. Now, beyond that too, also has to do with how the introduction of a state of emergency will now divert most of these youth within this space into other areas of crime. I've indicated that, yes, they may be engaged in environmental crime, which is the environmental terrorism, but if you put a force on them based on some of the information we've heard from this space where others even have certain pump action guns or rifles that they hold, they may divert the use of these rifles onto the streets and begin to rob, right? So when you introduce some of these activities, it leads to other crimes that as a country we may not be able to manage and maybe we may worsen our situation. I think that as a country, as I indicated earlier, we need a thorough research of that space. We need to identify the major contributors of unsustainable mining or illegal mining. We need to invest in research. And we at CEMSE believe that one of the major reasons why illegal mining continues is also the poor utilization of what we call the Mineral Development Fund, and also the poor utilization of the 80% of royalties that is expected to go to MIF or maybe expected to go to other infrastructure development. We believe that if, as a country, we are able to effectively manage the Mineral Development Fund, it will create a lot of alternative jobs within these mining communities and ensure that those youth who would have gone into legal mining will have other well-paying jobs, and then it diverts their attention from illegal approach to finding decent jobs within their communities. We also believe that some of these communities do not have that necessary infrastructure, the health conditions or the health infrastructure, the education infrastructure of some of these communities are not good to talk about. So, as a country, how do we use the royalties we get from this mining to improve the infrastructure of or the social amenities or the social economy of these mining communities? Now, beyond that, comparing Ghana to other countries, what they do is that when they realize that this area is a mining zone, they create huge alternative jobs right within these communities, because they allocate most of the mineral royalties to these communities to create enabling jobs that bridges income inequality between those from the mining sector to other sectors of the economy. If you're able to address some of these things, I think that we may be able to resolve this sustainably. Beyond that, there's also evidence to support that most of the young guys within the illegal mining space are guys who just completed second cycle education or secondary schools. So why don't we get a national program that maybe equips these guys from secondary schools who are not able to go to the universities or may not have certain revenue to continue to universities, to equip them with some skill, and that skill must have an immediate market where their output gets attention. So you give them the skills, give them an immediate market, so that when they produce anything based on their skill, the market is able to absorb any output that they bring out. When that happens, it means that there's going to be a continuous source of revenue for them. So when there's a continuous source of revenue for them, I don't think that most of these guys will be at the Galamsey side. So if you do it that way as a country, what we are likely going to achieve, or what is possible, is that we cut the labor supply to the mining sector. So any rich man who buys excavator, any person who owns an illegal mining site or who wants to engage in illegal mining will not get cheap labor or will not get any labor to supply to this particular space. And that also in the long term creates a barrier for employment into unsustainable mining or illegal mining. I think when we're able to implement some of these strategies, it will help us than the call for state of emergency, which I think will not be the solution, but rather create a serious threat to our economy and to some of these mining areas. Okay, the repeal of 2462 has to do with mining in forest areas. I think that is one of the part of the whole unsustainable mining or illegal mining conversation or Galamsey conversation. It's just part of it. It's not the entire thing. And I believe that we also need to look at the ecological benefits of some of these forest enclaves or zones than what we talk about when it comes to the mining potential or the mineral right potential of this forest space. That is what we as a country need to define for ourselves, what we want to benefit within our ecological space or ecological zone. I believe that the flora and fauna of this space can also become tourism potential. And tourism today is one of the fourth largest contributor of our GDP. So if we even define certain concept or of using our forest reserves as storage sites or as other, they may equally give us the revenues that mining is going to give us compared to what we are getting today. So it's about this, it's a state policy. The state things in which we think that we need to critically look at some of these issues than always allowing people to mine. So we can review, repeal the LI 2462, but in repealing it, it must be dependent on a policy to generate wealth from our forest. And in generating that particular wealth from the forest, it must not be a mineral wealth, but other potentials of that forest. If today we could even sell the forest to many industrial countries who are emitting certain high levels of carbon dioxide. Today, the forest could even be sold to Tor, because Tor, if they start refining, they'll be emitting. And if they want to equalize their emission levels with neutrality or with carbon sequestration, they could buy some of these forests and pay to the central government. In other jurisdictions, Europe, people buy forests because they want to emit. So that emission neutral or the sequestering of this carbon dioxide by the forest neutralizes your emission level. So we should not always look at the low-hanging fruits of getting minerals from the grounds in the forest, thereby allowing mining in the forest. We can also sell the forest and get huge amounts of money from them for certain industries. And today, there are companies or industrial wealth looking for such forests to buy from Africans and from other private citizens in Africa. For example, in Ghana, like this, GMPC has bought part of Mole National Park. Now, GMPC has bought part of the Mole National Park because GMPC is a company that produces fossil fuel. Now, in producing fossil fuel, the emission levels will increase. So, if emission levels are increased, what do you do to neutralize? You buy forest. So, I think that we should repeal it. We can review it, but that must be formed by our policy direction and what we want to use our forest to gain or to benefit from. If you look at the law carefully, right, there are responsibilities assigned to various stakeholders within the mining space. I think land reclamation is the responsibility of Mineral Development Fund by the law, and also the responsibility of Mineral Commission by the law. So it is not the individual, especially when we talk of large mines. It's not the individual company, or if we talk of artisanal mining, it's not the individual company that must reclaim. It is the Mineral Commission or the MDF, because allocations are made. I mean allocation, revenues are made or fees are paid for these operational purposes to these entities. So if the entities apply these revenues well, we should not be having dug out pits across the space. We should not be having maybe on certain practices leaving huge pits that cause certain environmental havoc or hazards to people living within these communities. So the responsibility lies on MDF, which is the Mineral Development Fund, and the Mineral Commission, and not the people. And if maybe EPA will assist in terms of ensuring that persons or regulators within the space complies to the rules of the game, I think that it will help us alleviate some of these dugout pits that are within these mining communities. Tor is a critical asset. If you want to ensure energy security, Tor has a role to play. And energy security simply means availability of the source of energy and also affordability as well as the sustainability of it. Tor has a role to play. And that is why the first president of the republic, before we even discovered oil, saw the need to have Tor as a critical national asset. I think that there is good news for us because the new management is promising of revamping the operations of Tor. And I think they proposed or projected that by October, the company will start some form of refining petroleum products. I think we should allow them. What I think they need to do to be very competitive in the space is to add certain units. Because as we speak today, its outputs or the products that come from Tor, especially when we talk of diesel, has a sulfur content way beyond what is imported into the country. We import about 50 part per million sulfur content, but what Tor refines is around 1500 ppm, and the knowledge of imported sulfur content being very lower within the market will now entice most of the OMCs to buy from imported sources that even get into toll, looking at the sulfur content of this particular product. So I think that we need to critically introduce hydrodesulfurization units within the space to ensure that their products are of similar quality to imported products. And that makes them very competitive within the local space. Now, beyond that, I think that it also must be infused into a national policy, which most of the time we do lack. We are an oil-producing country, even though we are not the main producers, but we do have certain shares in the production of oil. As we speak, we are doing about 135 to almost 140,000 barrels a day. TOR has a capacity to do almost 45,000, and it's even if there are certain installations, even has capacity to do more than 60,000 barrels if they install some of their units. Now, what it means is that averagely, our production from the upstream, averagely, we get about 20 to 25%. So the 20 to 25% of GMPs, which are GMPs lifting, I think that within an integrated, which is a vertical integration model, we could allocate that to TOR, and TOR refines and maybe sells it to Go Energy, which is also a state-owned company. So when there is a security of supply of product, I think that TOR management will always have product to refine and ensure that the market is available, because Go Energy will supply these products to GOEL and other OMCs to be able to sell onto the local market. So we need that vertical business integration model of integrating GMPC to TOR and maybe BOSS as a reserve, but even TOR also has their own tanks to also reserve this product. Now, what I think we also need to do is to ensure certain financial sustainability of the company. I think over the years we do talk about certain huge liabilities or making losses. We talk so because the company has not been funded by government for some time now. Even though if you look at the ESLA, there's some 8 pesos per liter that is expected to be allocated to them. As to whether it goes is another thing. So we need to push a lot of resources and make sure that they are very financially viable. If the financial viability in future government decides that we will list it on the stock based on certain profitability outcomes, we'll list it on the stock, and then maybe private ownership will ensure certain financial, managerial, and operational discipline to improve its activities. If today we are giving BOST, which company is not a refiner, which company is not a strategic, even though it was established to be a strategic reserve holder, but for regulatory purposes, the BOST margin is not for strategic reserve, but for maintenance of infrastructure, is attracting 12 Ghana cedis per liter on fuel. Why is TOR not getting something? And TOR is a company that can ensure our energy security in terms of affordability of products and also availability of refined products locally. Now, beyond that, I think that TOR, our market is very competitive because there are a lot of BDCs who import these products into the country. So what we can also do is that within the vertical integration model, TOR can refine, give it to BOSS, and BOSS sells it abroad, maybe to our neighbors in Burkina or to our neighbors in Mali and Niger. When you're able to do that, it also gets into country or inflows of foreign currency or certain liquid currency from abroad, which may mostly will be in dollars. So it also helps us to stabilize our city, right, when we are getting a lot of dollars from these landlord countries up north. So we need to look at TOR must work, right? We shouldn't be thinking that we are going to collapse it, because if you collapse it, it also means that we are going to create a lot of unemployment issues. If you collapse it, means that we are going to create a lot of stranded assets, which means that all the assets that are there will not have any purpose to function. So we are going to even sell them as scraps, and that's also will cost us a state. So in terms of maybe collapsing it, thought of collapsing it, why don't we make the assets an opportunity instead of a liability or a challenge? We should make the assets an opportunity. And in making the assets an opportunity is to just get some cash to inject or capital to inject into the operation revive, retool, and ensure that they become very operational in the coming days. But I'm glad that the new government wants to make it operational. We're looking forward to that by October it comes on stream and starts refining. So if they start refining, it may even push our fuel prices to be a bit cheaper than what we're expecting to do. So I think we also need to look at corporate governance structure of this company. But my experience is not only tall of the space. ECG does a lot of opaque contracts. ECG's liabilities are even more than that of TOR. ECG's profitability in terms of losses are even higher than that of TOR. ECG is doing about 7 billion Ghana cedis losses. TOR, I think, is now doing around 500 and something million Ghana cedis losses. So comparatively, are we also saying that we should collapse ECG? No, we are not saying that. I think that TOR needs a new corporate governance structure, and this corporate governance structure must be disassociated from political interference, must be disassociated from government of the day interference. And I think that has been the bane of TOR, because if you look at it carefully, any government that comes into office changes the strategic view of this particular company. And strategic view at least must expire within 5 years. So when you introduce a strategic policy, it might expire within 5 years, or even sometimes more than 5 years. But because of the 4-year cycle of our political regime, if your party doesn't win, a new party comes and says that we are restructuring the strategy. So maybe our government has come, and because our government has come, we need to realign government policies to the new company, and that always defeats the purpose of that particular company. Because, for example, if you look at the previous NDC around 2015, 2016, and what happened, there was some form of refining, right? Because the government then believed that TOR must refine. But when they went into opposition, a new government came and said, we don't want it to refine. We just want the terminal activities done, or some form of commercial activities done, and not refining. You get it. So when political cycles change, when political or parties in government change, they change the strategy. So we need to have a consensus, right? And that consensus must come from two political parties and how they can strategize or put in a strategy that is sustainable. And that goes beyond any political party that comes into office. So we need to look at it that way. Now, the other part also is that I think that we must also stop changing leadership. Yes, sometimes some leadership will call for change, but we must stop changing leadership. Because TOR in the last 5 years or so has had almost about 6 leaders. Right? So leadership change also brings in, anytime it brings new strategies, and these strategies we are not able to implement them to their fullest, and then we cancel and bring new one. So everything about TOR has to do with this corporate governance. If they are able to get their corporate governance structure well, devoid of politics, I think that that company will be something that will help all of us in terms of our energy security. Now, lastly, I think that the company must also be bold enough in terms of its recruitment, because it has become a source of generating employment for political party financiers or cronies or political party affiliates. And for that matter, if you look at their employment status today, it will exceed the capacity they need as their production level. So we need to also manage employment. I think it's very critical. We need to manage employment. If you continue to employ more than the entity needs, it also calls for a lot of expenditure because general and administrative expenditure will increase, and it goes against certain revenue expectations or certain profitability expectations to plow back into the company. So these are things that if you're able to implement well, the company will be very financially sustainable and financially viable, and continue to refine for us as a country. Ha, I think that most of feasibility and right time. I think that most of these utilities or state-owned entities that operate within our energy sector, especially the power sector, don't need some of these proposals or some of these requests for adjustment or upward adjustment of revenue they are asking for. Because source of revenue for any company are derived from two areas. We look at external approach of getting revenue, or maybe realigning certain expenditure within our internal operations to realize some form of revenue. What I think our companies over the years have been doing is to always look for external sources of revenue and always come to Ghanaians to adjust tariff upward. That philosophy, I think, will not help this particular economy. I think that philosophy is likely going to crash our growth. I also think that that philosophy is likely also going to increase a lot of poverty within certain households because in modern energy markets, in modern energy economies, the focus always is about tariff reduction. The focus of many economies is to look at how we make electricity very affordable, and that feeds into what they call the Sustainable Development Goal 7, which is affordability, renewable or green energy and affordability. So that is the focus of most countries. We want to make our energy affordable because they believe that energy affordability will increase growth of their economy because it will support the manufacturing sector, and then when the manufacturing sector picks up, it also creates a lot of jobs for their teeming youth. But as a country, I think that our revenue projections or our tariff projections have always been on the upward side because we think that that is the only source of revenue to ensure that we are very financially viable or sustainable. But that is wrong. The reason is that if you look at most of these companies, if we talk of frivolous procurement, ECG, there's an establishment that ECG engages in frivolous procurement based on KPMG report and based on the procurement report by the Ministry of Energy and Green Transition, which was launched this year. If you talk of underreporting of revenue, there's established that according to KPMG, ECG doesn't report its revenue well. It keeps on revenue and mismanages particular revenue. If we talk of procuring of faulty meters, there's established report that ECG engages in procuring substandard meters that they will not use. And these are huge sums of revenue that we are wasting. So wastage alone, addressing wastage as ECG alone, will be able to give them the necessary revenue they need to be able to embark on any operational activity or exercise they want to embark on, right? So I think that instead of Ghanaians focusing or the companies focusing always on the external approach of mobilizing revenue, they need to look at internal. How do they address frivolous procurement? Over 2,000 containers that they don't need. How do they address it? We need to address that. How do they address certain contracts, especially retailing contracts, vendor contracts that they go into with other companies, where these companies get huge sums of interest commissions, whilst ECG is always at a loss. They need to address that. They need to address why they always buy 40 meters in using huge sums of revenue to buy 40 meters, and at the end of the day, they need to change these meters. They need to address that. When you are able to address all these are savings to the company. And these savings could be able to use or be able to use them to expand the operations that they are talking about. Now, lastly, I also think that system losses is a huge problem for ECG. The last time we at CEMSE computed system losses as revenue source for this particular company, it exceeded 7 billion Ghana cedis. Now, imagine system losses is even reduced to the benchmark set by PURC, which is 21%. That means that ECG is going to get additional 2 billion from system losses, savings from system losses. And these are all revenues that will help improve the operational efficiency or the operational effectiveness of ECG. So I think it is not about always bailing or tariff adjustment to increase bills at the household level or industrial level. It is about how they manage the limited resources we have. And over the years, they've not done that. So I think the government should critically reform these companies to be able to be very efficient and cost effective? If they are, at the end of the day, they will always come to Ghanaians to pass on some of these adjustments, the tariff adjustment to Ghanaians. And lastly, too, I think that today we also need to critically look at the energy market. I believe that this compound nature of always introducing what we call tariff-based adjustment, or maybe periodic tariff-based adjustment. I think we need to critically look at it. We need to set certain standards whereby tariffs are based on macroeconomic indicators, and tariffs are also based on market-driven indicators, just like what we do in the fuel sector. If we believe that in future or in the market, macroeconomic indicators, especially exchange rate, it is quite high, then that would demand for us to look at tariff adjustment upward. If we think that exchange rate is quite low, we decrease tariff adjustment to the lowest minimum based on the appreciation of the cedi. If we also think that inflation could be a factor in computing tariffs, if inflation is quite lower comparatively to previous, we also look at it and then adjust our tariffs lower so that we benefit. And also look at the market-driven indicator, the sources of energy. Are we using more of hydro, or are we using more of thermal? If more of hydro, it means that the market source or the energy source has changed. Hydro is quite cheaper, so it must reflect in our tariff. If you are going to use a lot of natural gas, sometimes even quite expensive, but the natural gas must also be dependent on the price of natural gas as well as the weighted average cost. We shouldn't just be sitting and be projecting revenue sources for our utilities. No, revenue sources must be based on macroeconomic and market-driven indicators. So if in future, today they are telling us that we need to pay 225 within the next 5 years, assuming in future, right, the price of natural gas reduces to the barest minimum, which means we'll be overpaying. Assuming in future, inflation or currency cedi appreciates to the highest minimum against the dollar, it means that we are overpaying. So what is happening currently within our regulatory sector of the power sector is that we are not paying the market-based tariff. We are paying tariff based on a regulated sector, which is a control sector, and that is likely going to go against the utilities or go against the consumer. And I think that is not the best. We need to get a market-based tariff where the tariff is reflective of the macroeconomic indicator we use in setting it, as well as the market-driven indicator. And that is very fair in terms of pricing, right? But when we use this approach of what we call a 5-year moving average of increment, I think that it has never helped us, because today prices of electricity are expected to be too low, but they are not low because we projected certain revenues for them and we need those revenues, right? Even at the time that the cedi has appreciated, at the time that inflation is down, price of electricity is still high. It's still high because we projected this revenue for them even before today. So I think that we need to look at it and ensure that our electricity pricing are market driven and not just regulated. Yes, so if you look at the Energy Sector Recovery Program report published by or supported by the World Bank says that for us to grow 6% on the average, year on year, we should be growing 6%. It means that we need our tariff should be around 13 cents per kilowatt hour. Our tariff should be very cheap, right? Because at that time they were comparing us to a country like Ivory Coast, which was then around 15 cents per kilowatt hour. At that time, they were comparing us to South Africa, which was then around 10 cents per kilowatt hour. That time, they were comparing us to countries like China, our major competitors, which tariff were around 7 and 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Today, as we speak, most of our northern African countries are doing 4 cents per kilowatt hour. They are quite cheaper, very, very cheaper than Ghana. And South Africa is still cheaper than Ghana in terms of their industrial sector. So what I think we need to do as a country is to ensure that our energy is very affordable. And as we indicated, when energy is very affordable, it promotes SME growth, right? Small and medium scale enterprises are able to expand their business operations because energy, which is their main operational cost, is quite low. So they're able to even employ more. They're able to engage in other very competitive outputs compared to their imported products. So it is critical. Energy affordability is critical. Now, beyond SMEs, also has to do with industries. Today, our manufacturing sector may not be performing well because of one of the factors of manufacturing, or factor of production within the manufacturing, is energy, right? So if energy is very, very expensive, their output will be expensive. And if their output is expensive, they may not be able to compete with imported products who get energy at maybe 4% or maybe 4 cents per kilowatt hour, or who even get interest rate at 4%. So the reason why our production sector or manufacturing sector has not been performing well is because of the cost of energy and other related factors. So I think that when we allow some of these continuous upward adjustment of electricity prices, it is going to collapse our SME sector. And when it does that, it means that unemployment is going to increase. And if unemployment increases, it brings a lot of poverty. And it brings a lot of poverty, it brings a lot of environmental crime, including what the Galamsey we discussed about earlier. I've stated that earlier that we need to reform the space. Reformation means that we need a new corporate governance structure that ensures that there's financial discipline, and there's managerial discipline, and also operational discipline, which is technical discipline of these state-owned entities. And we should limit a lot of political interference in the recruitment process of these state-owned entities, because that has also been the bane of the sector. Beyond that, I think that we need to also introduce certain private sector participation within the operations of our utilities. And I think private sector participation, as we know, per certain theories, will ensure most of these optimal disciplines I've discussed earlier, which is the financial optimality, which is the managerial optimality, which is also a technical optimality. These are good ways of ensuring that the companies become very profitable to be able to defray most of the debts we discussed or you mentioned. Beyond that, too, I think that Ghana is likely going to absorb the cost of some of these debts. Ghana is likely going to absorb the fuel component of it, because Ghana has introduced a D-levy, and D-levy is also to defray some of these debts in the power sector. So whilst the state has absorbed some of these debts, the only challenge for ECG and most of these utilities is the only challenge for them is to control their cost effectiveness so that recurrent debts do not accumulate, right? Because if recurrent debt does accumulate, it means that there is going to be a dead horse theory, or we just flopping the dead horse. While the government is absorbing debt, they are compounding the debt situation by accumulating more debt. I think that they also need to set up to ensure that they don't compound most of the debt. And setting up doesn't mean that it must be transferred onto the electricity end user. They must look in-house internally and then minimize some of their expenditure, cut a lot of cost, and even if they will downsize their employment, they need to downsize, because any of these are measures to cut costs and be very cost effective, and that savings could also be used to pay some of these debts, whilst government also supports in other way to defray other debts. For me, I think that most of the taxes in the sector needs a critical look at, because they've been a source of revenue for government, and it may be difficult for government to scrap them, because these have become constant, sustainable source of revenue, because of the inelastic nature of what do you mean? The inelastic nature of fuel, whether you like it or yes, depending on any price you buy, because you need it. They are the only source of energy that we have, especially for the transport sector. So because of that, government thinks that that's the easiest way of making money. So they will introduce these particular levies there. But we need to look at the build-up. Do some of them perform the functions that they were established to perform? Some of them have they expired on the build-up? We need to look at it. For example, if you take Article 879, which introduced the special petroleum tax, it was for a purpose that at that time our fuel price on the international market or petroleum receipt was declining because price of the product on the international market was very low. So we needed that to support our budget. We introduced that since 2014. It's still on the build-up. We can take it out. Today it's 46%. We can take it out. Now beyond that, we also have to look at the Energy Sector Levy Act with several amendments to now add what you call the Energy Sector Shortfall and Debt Recovery Levy, which amendment now is 1135. We need to look at some of them. So we take, for example, Energy Debt Recovery Levy. When are we going to stop paying this debt? Even when we introduced the S-line, it was a sunset clause that by 5 years or so we should be done paying this debt. But till date is over 10 years now, and we are still paying. So we need to look at the energy road fund. Is it serving the purpose? Are we getting the roads from it? We need to look at that too. If we think we are not getting the roads from the fund, or it's not serving its purpose, then it means we need to scratch it, take it out, so that it makes price of fuel very affordable. We can also look at energy fund levy for energy commission. Are they improving or promoting the usage of energy efficient, energy conservative electrical appliances? Are we hearing from them? What are they? So all this, if they are not going, we need to scrap them, right, from the build-up. Later we introduce sanitation and pollution levy, energy sector recovery levy. All these levies, to me, we need to critically look at the function they perform. If they are performing certain functions that we think they are needed, we need to keep them there. But if they are not performing the functions we think they are needed, we need to take them out. Now, there's also what we call the price stabilization recovery levy, which we use to fund subsidies on, which is a cross-subsidy program, or levy used to fund the agri sector, which is the fishery sector, which is a subset of the agri sector. I think that we need to stop funding subsidies on premix, right? Because at the end of the day, these premix are diverted onto the market and politicians benefit, and not the fishermen. The fishermen even still buy this premix fuel at market prices and not subsidized. So we need to take out the price stabilization recovery levy so that we don't subsidize premix for politicians to benefit out of it. Now, lastly, I think the government has also introduced certain margins that we need to look at. A boss margin needs to be scrapped because today boss is a limited liability company, and we as Ghanaians cannot continue to fund them as a limited liability company because they are not even serving us any function, they are not serving us any purpose. So it needs to be scrapped. We need to also look at primary distribution margin, which is under the interdepot margin. We need to look at it because I think it's overpriced. We are overpricing, we are overpaying for the primary distribution margin. We need to look at it. We need to also look at what we call the Unified Petroleum Price Fund, whether we deregulate it, right, so that OMCs will set their own prices, transport costs, and that makes the market very competitive and fully deregulated, unlike the partial deregulation we have where OMC, BLPA continues to decide, UPPF, and the UPPF doesn't even benefit transporters, but rather benefit politicians, especially national security and other politicians within in the Flagstaff House. So we need to look at some of these and assess them whether they have certain positive impact within the space. If they do, we keep them. If they don't, we take them out, right? Because if you want to ensure cost effectiveness, cost efficiency, we need to scrap some of these levies and ensure that fuel prices are very affordable and improve what we call alleviate what we call energy poverty, because it's a critical issue in Ghana. So these are things I think we need to look at it. I think also on LPG, I call for a total scrap of any form of tax on LPG. Because LPG is a clean cooking energy. LPG has a source of energy that reduces emission, has an impact on the environment, which is positive impact on the environment. As you say, has a positive impact on the environment because most of the data with respect to emissions also come from what you call the forestry and other land uses, which is we call AFLU. AFLU is a major contributor of greenhouse gas emissions, right? GHG emissions in Ghana. And it's also because many people in Ghana use wood fuel. So one way to reduce the usage of wood fuel at the household level is to ensure that LPG is very affordable and also accessible. So most of the time, in certain jurisdictions, LPG is accessible but not affordable. So many people don't want to buy LPG. It is so because we still have taxes on LPG. In many countries that I've seen, Senegal, they don't have taxes on it. Neither do they have subsidies on it. They used to have subsidies on it, but they spoil the subsidies, but they don't put taxes on it. Ivory Coast has subsidies on it. Nigeria used to have subsidies. They are trying to remove the subsidies. So countries are thinking, even in India, people who use LPG are paid, especially low-income earners, are even paid for using LPG. So we need to look at how we can make LPG affordable, and that by mean we need to scrap all the taxes of LPG and other margins that make the product very expensive. The minister's comment where they used hydro, which is large hydro in Ghana, as a source of renewable energy, and to postulate or project that by December, our renewable energy within our energy mix will be 35% is an overstatement. I think that it is likely going to derail our effort in achieving the 10% renewable energy target that we've set for ourselves by 2030, based on the Renewable Energy Master Plan and also the Renewable Energy Act established by us. I think large hydro has never been considered as a renewable energy because within our Renewable Energy Master Plan, we considered a mini hydro of 100 megawatts. But these large hydros are doing in excess of 400 megawatts because we, for example, is doing 400 and Akosomo is doing it in excess of 900. So why do we consider we and Akosomo, which are traditionally based load energy sources, as renewable energy? I think that the ministry is overstating these issues for whatever reason we do not know. But the reason why they made the Ministry of Energy and Green Transition, is to introduce other new renewables, or what we call the new renewables, into our energy mix. And we expect that by 2030, 10% of our energy mix should be the new renewables, which includes mini hydros, which includes solar, which includes geothermal, which includes wind. These are what we're talking about. But for him to say that by December we are attaining 35% of our energy mix using renewable based on hydro, I think it's an overstatement, it's a false statement, because if we talk of mainly hydro, as of 2015, our hydro mix within our energy space or installed capacity was 43%. So if Ghana had already attained 43% of hydro, then means that if we are using large hydro as the benchmark, then Ghana has already achieved within the 10% of the renewable that we're talking about. So I think we need to focus. And in focusing means that we need to deviate from the knowledge of using the large hydros as a component of renewable, and then focus on generating other off-grid solutions or mini hydros that are more new technologies when it comes to renewable. So this overstatement must not be accepted. I think that Ghana will not achieve 35% of renewable energy by December 2025. We are not there yet. Currently, we are doing 2.4, and that is the standard, and that is what we do. If they want to tell us that they are going to increase certain off-grid solutions, they are going to increase certain solar, they are going to increase mini hydros for us to achieve the 35, it is also unrealistic. They cannot achieve it. And I think the ministry must manage this information well to ensure that we're able to achieve most of the targets we set for ourselves by 2030. I think that Ghana has achieved energy stability because currently our power sector is stable, our petroleum sector is stable. But we have not yet achieved energy sustainability. So there's stability, but there's no sustainability. Because of that lack of sustainability, most of government priority projects, we may not be able to implement them, especially the 24-hour economy. I don't think we'll be able to implement them to the fullest because the source of power is not even there. Looking at the program, what they want to install or what they want to implement within the whole policy framework of 24-hour economy, we don't have the source of power to be able to fund or support that particular program. So there's no energy sustainability. And if we also look at how our consumption of power or demand for power is increasing year on year between 7 to 10%, and the lackadaisical nature of our politicians to increase our generation, it means that by 2027 or 2028, we are likely going to be in doom so because the demand then will be almost closer to our generation. And if the demand is almost closer to our generation without higher reserve margin of about 18%, it means that anytime there's a loop in the system or anytime there's a confusion in the system, we are in doom. So I think that politicians and government must begin to embark on certain strategies to increase our generation between 2026 and 2027. If we are able to do that, at least we are assured of a bit of sustainability between now and 2028. So we should not be singing praises. We are singing praise because we are stable. But I think in future may be very dire to us if we don't initiate certain programs and policies now.